Hi, I'm Regina Campbell with the Campbell Law Group, and today we're coming to speak to you about another how-to series. Hopefully you've been enjoying them and they've been helpful. Today we're going to talk about what type of alimony that you need, basically. And this is a topic that, as always, most things in law can be fairly complex and a little bit more involved, so to speak, than initial, precursory discussion about the different types of alimonies that you may need. However, I do think it's important just to have an outline of understanding these different types of alimony that are available to you in Florida. Of course, every state's going to have various different alimonies that are available to spouses, just depends on the circumstances. However, in Florida, we have several, actually a little bit more than several. We have 4 different types of alimonies, excluding lump sum alimony. I know it has the word alimony in it, but it's actually typically more associated with sort of an equal distribution type of alimony or sort of division versus the actual typical alimony that is usually structured to provide support on an ongoing basis, whether it's short-term or long-term for the other spouse transitioning out of divorce, basically from married life to divorce. So to go over a little bit about the different types of alimonies that you may need, let's start first with bridge the gap alimony. Bridge the gap alimony is usually seen in sort of short-term. It can be sometimes mid-term marriages as well, depending on the circumstances. And it basically requires you to identify an actual short-term legitimate need that you may have as a spouse. Basically, for instance, you need just enough to transition yourself to an apartment or with furniture, something of that nature. Usually also bridge the gap alimony is limited to a maximum of 2 years and can only be terminated upon remarriage of the wife or death of the husband or wife or spouse. So it's either remarriage of the husband or wife or death of the husband or wife, basically the spouse receiving the alimony. Otherwise, it's not considered modifiable. Then we also have rehabilitative alimony that is available also. That usually requires a set plan in place. So in other words, maybe if the spouse receiving the alimony can become self-sufficient or support themselves within, let's say, 3 years, let's say they finish their law degree or some kind of certification or licensing that they may need in order to become self-sufficient, a lot of times rehabilitative alimony is perfect for that. And it can, just so you understand, they will set the court or their parties by agreement will set a particular plan in place so that if the other spouse is not complying with the plan, potentially the alimony can be modified, okay, or terminated if they're not following in accordance with the plan. Also, durational alimony. This is the third type of alimony that exists in Florida, and this can be seen in short-term, mid-term, or long-term marriages. And durational can be modifiable or non-modifiable depending on the circumstances. Most of the time when durational alimony is given by the court, it's modifiable. And more often than not, you'll see non-modifiable sort of claims in marital settlement agreements between the parties. And modifiable and non-modifiable is pretty much what it sounds like. Non-modifiable basically means that you might have agreed to a non-modifiable alimony term, let's say 5 years, but maybe the amount of alimony might still be modifiable. Or vice versa. The amount is non-modifiable, but maybe the terms of the years are not. So it just depends. And of course, modifiable means it can be modified as far as the duration and the amount per alimony of payment every month. So just something to kind of keep in mind and to understand the distinctions. Everyone's situation is different. Sometimes someone might opt for non-modifiable in order to structure a deal a certain way or limit the person's rights just to make something. For instance, let's say you need 2 or 3 years of a higher alimony amount before there's some potential instability with a change in circumstances that can modify your alimony. So you might negotiate non-modifiable alimony for a period of time, or you believe the person's income is going to be lower due to maybe market forces like COVID or something. So you'll agree to a non-modifiable alimony at the time in order to just get a deal and still leave yourself open for the possibility that if the other party's income increases, you get the potential upside of that increase if it should happen. So that's an example of the use of modifiable and non-modifiable. Durational is also limited by the amount of the years in the marriage. So in other words, if you've been married for 10 years, midterm marriage, you might be entitled to up to 10 years in durational alimony. Okay, more often than not, courts, people always say, Regina, what do you normally see? And I'm always hesitant to give averages or estimates because it's so different with every particular case and parties and circumstances. But basically, on average, I'll see something. If it's 10 years, it's usually between 4 and 6 that the alimony may be given for. Once again, also to keep in mind, alimony, bridge the gap, rehabilitative, and durational can. Well, and permanent, not necessarily. It's a little bit different permanent unless you mix them together. But for the most part, there's different alimonies you can be given 2 different alimonies, for instance, So keep in mind that it's not always one size fits all either. The court can potentially, make a decision that works, that's particularly for your clients, your family's needs and financial circumstances at the time, and they could potentially award 1 or 2 different kinds, various types of that, durational, and maybe bridge the gap alimony or a variation of either one of them. Something to keep in mind. So keep in mind that also the courts can potentially mix and match alimony, different types of alimonies depending on the party's specific needs or financial circumstances. And lastly, to go back into durational, also alimony can also be modified based upon a substantial, unless it's non-modifiable, can be modified by a substantial change in circumstances by one or both parties. Also, if the spouse engages in a financially supportive relationship, remarries, or passes away. So it's very important also to understand how these alimonies can be modified so that you're making sure you're picking the right one for you. And finally, we have permanent alimony, and it pretty much indicates what it denotes. Permanent alimony means usually reserved, although in rare cases you'll see it in short-term and mid-term marriages, is usually reserved for marriages that are more than 17 years in duration, basically long-term marriages. So that basically means that the other party and the recipient can be paying and receiving alimony for the rest of their lives, or until a substantial change in circumstances occurred, which is often retirement, or there's a change in someone's income earlier than that, financial or medical changes, something of that nature. Just depends on the circumstances, but it can also be modified. But permanent is what it denotes. Basically, the alimony will continue until either terminated by death, remarriage, or entering into a financially supportive relationship, or by showing the other side, the court and the other side basically have suffered, so to speak, a substantial change in the circumstances that may warrant either modification or termination of the alimony. Okay. So hopefully this has been helpful. I know it's a lot to take in. This is just the first tier, so to speak, to understand the different possible alimonies that you might be entitled to or that you may need. Get the conversation going. As always, every situation is so different, every person is so different, and every family is so different. It's important to weigh out the different options that you may have and the different things that are available to you. Of course, this also indicates if we're talking about the different forms of alimony, but we also need to still prove that your spouse has the ability to pay the type of alimony that you're seeking, which is the other half of the equation that we'll be talking about some other time, going a little bit further into. But hopefully this has been helpful. We hope to see you on our social media channels. Hopefully you'll follow us on all our pages, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Also, we request that you become a subscriber of our YouTube channel and our Apple Podcast channel. If you like, we also have a newsletter so you can keep up to date with all the new information that we send out. And we hope this has been helpful and enjoyable. Thank you, and take care.